Tucked away in the peaceful town of Graham, Washington, where calm wasn't just a feeling, it was the heartbeat of everyday life. Something unimaginable took place. It was the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other with a wave from their porches, where the sound of laughter filled the quiet streets, and where the Mocks, full of hope and excitement for the future, had just begun their new life together. Brian and Beverly Mock were the kind of couple people gravitated toward, kind, warm, and full of life. Their love story was the heart of the community. Brian, with his easygoing nature, could light up a room. Beverly, ever the optimist, had a smile that could soften even the hardest hearts. Together, they painted a picture of happiness that seemed untouchable. But on one cold November evening, the story of Brian and Beverly took a dark and sinister turn. When neighbors hadn't seen the couple in days, concern began to grow. Calls went unanswered. Lights that once warmly illuminated their home now stood as silent beacons of unease. Then came the moment that shattered the peace forever. Their home became the center of an unimaginable horror. What was discovered behind those closed doors would haunt the town for years to come. The lives of Brian and Beverly Mock had been violently extinguished. What should have been the sanctuary of their love story had become the stage for an unspeakable crime. Execution-style gunshots ended their dreams, their future, and the very lives they had built together. But this wasn't just a random act of violence. This wasn't the work of a faceless stranger lurking in the shadows. The truth, as it slowly came to light, would reveal a chilling reality. The person responsible wasn't a stranger at all. The killer? They lived closer than anyone could have imagined. A deadly betrayal hidden behind a familiar face. As investigators pieced together the fragments of this nightmare, they unearthed secrets that would leave even the most seasoned detectives questioning everything they thought they knew about trust, community, and human nature. How could such a heinous act unfold in a place so peaceful? Who could commit such a heartless crime against two people who only wanted to live and love? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, could this have been prevented? This is the story of Brian and Beverly Mock, a story of love and loss, of betrayal and justice, of a town forever changed by the evil that walked among them. For Brian and Beverly Mock, this was the perfect setting to begin the rest of their lives together. Brian was a man of steady hands and a warm heart. At 27, he had built a reputation as someone who could always be counted on. Whether it was a friend in need of advice or a neighbor needing a helping hand, Brian showed up with a smile that seemed to say, "It's all going to be okay." Beverly, just 28, was the light of every room she entered. Her laugh was infectious and her kindness was unmatched. She had a way of making everyone feel like they mattered, a rare gift that made her unforgettable. Together, they were the embodiment of love, trust, and hope. Their home was a modest one, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where the streets rarely saw trouble. Flower beds lined the walkway, and a handmade wreath adorned the front door. It was the kind of house that seemed to tell a story of happiness, a story that Brian and Beverly were eager to continue writing. But in November 2007, that story came to an abrupt and horrifying end, and in its place, a nightmare began. It started with something small, something easily overlooked in a world so busy. The mail piled up in their mailbox. At first, it didn't seem strange. Perhaps they were away for a few days, people thought. But as the days turned to nights, and the nights into more days, concern began to ripple through the neighborhood. Calls to their phones went unanswered. Their usually lit windows remained dark, and the quiet that once felt comforting began to feel foreboding. It was a neighbor, unable to shake the growing sense that something was terribly wrong, who finally called the authorities. When the officers arrived, they were greeted by silence. The house stood still, an unsettling contrast to the warmth it had once radiated. The front door was locked, but inside was a scene that would haunt even the most experienced detectives. The officers found Brian and Beverly in the living room, their lifeless bodies lying close to one another. Both had been executed in cold blood, shot 3 times at close range. The air inside the house was thick, heavy with a silence that spoke volumes about the violence that had taken place. The Mock's love story had been violently and senselessly cut short. Who could have done this? And why? These were the questions that immediately plagued the investigators. There were no signs of forced entry, no indications of a robbery gone wrong. It was as if the couple had known their killer, trusted them enough to let them in. That realization sent shivers down everyone's spine. The person responsible for this heinous crime wasn't a stranger. They were someone close, very close. The investigation quickly turned toward Daniel Tavares Jr., a neighbor who had recently moved into the area. Tavares was quiet, kept to himself, and didn't seem to raise suspicions at first glance. But his past was anything but ordinary. Just months before, Tavares had been released from prison in Massachusetts, where he had served time for the brutal murder of his own mother. This wasn't a man trying to start over. This was a man with a history of unimaginable violence. Under the weight of mounting evidence, Tavares confessed to the murders. The reason? A dispute over a $50 debt. $50. That was all it took to end the lives of two beautiful souls, to shatter a family, and to plunge an entire community into grief. The callousness of it was incomprehensible. As the details of his confession came to light, so did the failures that had allowed Tavares to be in Graham in the first place. His release from prison had been poorly supervised, his violent tendencies overlooked in favor of granting him freedom. The cracks in the system were glaring, and now, 2 innocent lives had paid the price. In 2008, Daniel Tavares Jr. was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the families of Brian and Beverly, it was a small measure of justice, but no sentence could ever bring back what was lost. The memory of the Mocks, their laughter, their kindness, their love, became a haunting reminder of what could have been. The case drew national attention, appearing in documentaries and true crime specials. But for the people of Graham, it was more than a story on a screen. It was a wound that would take years to heal, a scar that would never truly fade. Brian and Beverly Mock were more than victims of a senseless crime. They were a symbol of everything good in the world, a reminder of how fragile that goodness can be. Their story forces us to confront difficult truths about the justice system, about the darkness that can hide behind familiar faces, and about the unimaginable cost of human failure. And so we are left with one haunting question. How many more lives will it take before we learn to truly protect the innocent? How many more tragedies before the cracks in the system are finally repaired? In the days following the discovery of Brian and Beverly Mock's lifeless bodies, Graham, Washington, felt like a town in mourning. It wasn't just the crime itself that haunted the community. It was the loss of 2 people who had come to represent everything good in their small corner of the world. Candles appeared on the Mock's front steps, flowers were laid with trembling hands, and neighbors huddled together in disbelief, asking the same question over and over. How could this happen? We never imagined something like this, one neighbor tearfully recalled during an interview. They were such kind people. Beverly once spent an entire afternoon helping me plant my garden. And Brian? He was the guy who'd shovel your driveway before you even woke up. They didn't deserve this. Their families, shattered by grief, found themselves at the center of a storm they never could have prepared for. Beverly's sister, her voice breaking with emotion, spoke about the last time she saw her sister alive. She hugged me so tightly, she said. She told me how excited she was about the life she and Brian were building. And now all of that is gone. At the memorial service held for the couple, the church overflowed with people. Friends, family, co-workers, and even strangers came to pay their respects. Beverly's father stood before the crowd, clutching a photograph of his daughter and son-in-law. His voice wavered as he tried to speak. Brian and Beverly were the best of us, he said. Their love was so pure, so full of promise. It's unbearable to think that they're gone. But I know they're still together, even now. Community members remembered Brian and Beverly not for how they died, but for how they lived. A close friend of Brian shared a story that brought tears and smiles in equal measure. Brian had this old, beat-up truck, the friend said. He called it old reliable, but the thing barely ran. One winter, when the roads were iced over, my car broke down, and I called him for help. He showed up in that truck, grinning ear to ear, and said, "Guess it's time for old reliable to live up to her name." That was Brian, always there, always with a smile. As the investigation unfolded, the community watched with a mixture of rage and sorrow. Daniel Tavares Jr., the man who had taken their beloved couple from them, showed no remorse. In court, he sat stone-faced, his demeanor cold and detached as the prosecutor laid out the details of his crimes. Witnesses testified to his violent history, painting a picture of a man who had been a danger to everyone around him long before he moved to Graham. "I begged them not to let him out," a former corrections officer testified. "He was manipulative, angry, and unpredictable. I told them he would hurt someone again, but no one listened." For the Mock's families, sitting in that courtroom was an excruciating experience. Beverly's mother clutched a handkerchief, her face pale as she listened to the harrowing details of her daughter's final moments. Brian's brother stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tightly, refusing to let his tears fall in front of the man who had caused so much pain. The day the verdict was read brought a measure of justice but no sense of closure. Beverly's father later said, "Life in prison is what he deserves, but it doesn't bring them back. It doesn't erase what he did." In the years since the murders, the community of Graham has worked to preserve the memory of Brian and Beverly. A local park now bears a bench dedicated to the couple, inscribed with the words, "Forever loved, never forgotten." Every year on the anniversary of their deaths, friends and family gather for a candlelight vigil, sharing stories and memories to keep their spirits alive. "They were the heart of this community," one attendee said at a recent vigil. "We gather here not just to mourn but to celebrate their lives, to remind ourselves of the love they shared and the goodness they brought into this world." But for the Mock's families, the pain remains as raw as it was on that November day. Beverly's mother often visits the park bench, sitting quietly and holding a small locket with her daughter's photograph inside. Brian's brother has dedicated himself to advocating for stricter parole laws, hoping to prevent another family from enduring the same heartbreak. "If we can save even one life," he said in an interview, "then maybe something good can come out of this nightmare, but nothing will ever fill the hole they left behind." As the years go by, the story of Brian and Beverly Mock continues to resonate, not just in Graham but across the country. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk in the most unexpected places, of the failures that can turn preventable tragedies into reality, and of the enduring power of love and memory to outshine even the darkest of deeds. As we unravel the heartbreaking story of Brian and Beverly Mock, one question echoes louder than any other. Could this tragedy have been avoided? In a world where decisions have rippling consequences, how many warning signs are too many? Daniel Tavares Jr. had a documented history of violence, a man whose past was marked by the brutal murder of his own mother. And yet, despite the danger he posed, he was released. Was it a failure of the justice system? Or was it a failure of society to prioritize the safety of its most vulnerable? Consider this. If Tavares had been closely monitored after his release, would Brian and Beverly still be alive today? Would their love story have continued, untainted by the darkness that took them too soon? It's a haunting thought, one that lingers long after the facts of the case are laid bare. And what about the $50 dispute that allegedly sparked this act of violence? Can something so trivial truly lead to something so horrific? Or was the debt merely an excuse, a thin veil over the deeper, more sinister motives of a man whose capacity for empathy was long gone? But this case isn't just about one man's violent actions. It's about the cracks in the system that allowed him to live freely in a peaceful community, surrounded by people who had no idea of the danger lurking next door. It's about the policies and decisions that prioritize technicalities over human lives. So what does it say about the justice system when a man like Daniel Tavares Jr. is given another chance, at the cost of 2 innocent lives? As viewers, we often consume stories like this from a distance, but let's pause and reflect. What would you do if this happened in your community? If the neighbor you waved to every morning turned out to be capable of such unspeakable acts, would you trust the system to protect you? Or would you take matters into your own hands? This tragedy forces us to ask difficult questions about accountability, both individual and systemic. Should the officials who granted Tavares his freedom bear some responsibility for what happened? Should there be consequences for those who ignored the warnings about his violent tendencies? Or is it enough to simply acknowledge their mistakes and move on? Brian and Beverly's families have spent years grappling with these questions. Beverly's mother once said in an interview, "I don't just blame him, I blame every person who saw the signs and did nothing. They let him out, knowing what he was capable of. They let him out and now my daughter is gone." Her words cut deep, don't they? They force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The system isn't just flawed, it's broken. And in its brokenness, it allowed a man with a violent past to destroy two beautiful lives and devastate an entire community. So, we ask you, the viewer, how many more lives must be lost before we demand change? How many families must endure this unimaginable pain before the system is held accountable? But let's also talk about the community of Graham, a place that refused to let this tragedy define them. Their strength in the face of loss is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They rallied together, not just to mourn but to remember, to honor the lives of Brian and Beverly in ways that would keep their memories alive. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is light. Even in despair, there is hope. Imagine yourself standing at the park bench dedicated to Brian and Beverly. The sun is setting, casting a warm golden glow over the inscription, "Forever loved, never forgotten." You hear the faint rustle of leaves, the distant laughter of children playing. In that moment, you're reminded of the preciousness of life, of how fragile and fleeting it can be. Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the role of supervision in cases like this? Do you believe the justice system failed Brian and Beverly? Or is this simply an unfortunate consequence of a system stretched too thin? Your voice matters. Let's continue the conversation, not just here, but in our communities, our schools, and our justice system. Because every voice raised in demand for change is a step closer to ensuring that tragedies like this never happen again. Brian and Beverly Mock deserved so much more than what the world gave them. They deserved a lifetime of love, laughter, and happiness, a lifetime stolen in an instant. Let us honor their memory not just with our tears, but with our actions. Let us be the change their families so desperately hope for, and let us never forget the light they brought into the world, a light that will continue to shine, even in their absence. If you found this story compelling, if it stirred something deep within you, then take a moment to make your voice heard. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a gripping true crime story like this one. Every subscription, every like, and every share helps keep these important conversations alive and pushes for the justice and awareness that so many victims, like Brian and Beverly, deserve. But the conversation doesn't end here. We want to hear from you. What do you think should be done to prevent cases like this? How can we ensure that our justice system learns from its mistakes? Share your thoughts below in the comments. Your perspective matters, and together we can be part of the change that's needed to protect the innocent and hold the system accountable. Join the conversation. Share your insights, your ideas, and your reflections. Let's keep this discussion going. Not just here, but in our communities, in our homes, and in our hearts. The fight for justice isn't over. It's only just beginning.